This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Well, as we continue our series on the architecture of reality, talking about the sun, the moon, and the stars, one of the things we're going to shift from kind of the Bible says to maybe some of the broader questions about the shift and the change to modernity. And one of the things that is really fascinating is if you were to stop and to just picture Earth for a minute in your imagination, right? If you stop, maybe close your eyes, picture Earth. Um, Almost every single person that I have ever talked to about this, they picture Earth from outer space, right? Their their conception of where they live uh, comes from a perspective that they have never been to. There's 15 people or something that have ever been off the planet. Um, just a few people that have ever even been to the moon and seen Earth from the perspective of space. But almost all of us, when we in our imagination, that's how we picture Earth. And if you think how strange that is, that we throw our imagination into a position that we've never been when we start talking about the place that we live, uh, it is it's surprising to me that that doesn't surprise more of us, uh, because um, our imagination has been decentered from our own experience about our place in the universe. We don't, if you would have asked somebody in 1900 or in 1700 or in 200 BC, picture Earth, almost every single person would have just looked down the ground between their feet, right? That's Earth. They're standing on it. It's the ground underneath them. The and they so before um, the imaginative cosmic revolution that has happened, uh, the we imagined ourselves in living our life from our own perspective, and the decentering of our imagination away from our own perspective has had really strange and wild effects on the world because it has been normalized, right? To think of the world from an outside perspective, it's been that's that we think of that as normal. We think of the entire universe as a machine. We talked last week about the sun, the moon, and the stars being clocks, and one of the things that is fascinating in this same vein is that when we think of clocks, we actually think of a digital clock on the wall, a computer keeping time for us, uh, which is and so our imagination works from the digital to the physical now, in almost every way. So we're even a little bit beyond a mechanistic view of reality, and we're leaning now towards even more of a digital view of reality. When you start studying any sort of uh, brain science, which I did just a deep dive on what do we know about the brain a couple years ago, read some fascinating books, some books that were actually very helpful on the way the brain functions and brain health and those sorts of things. Um, One of the most fascinating books I read is called "The Brain That Changes Itself," just about brain self repair. It's God built an incredible thing. So when he built the brain, I want to say incredible machine, but it's not a machine at all. An incredible organic, um, organic body part when he built the brain. But almost all of the metaphors that we end up falling into are computing metaphors. The problem is we aren't like a computer much at all, right? In some some vague similar ways we're like a computer. We in the sense that we take in and process information, but we don't compute information very often. In fact, with we used to consider the computation of information as one form of reasoning. This is why you hear people every once in a while, or maybe more often than you ought to, say, I don't get it. Why do you have to take geometry to pass high school? Geometry doesn't help. You never use geometry in the real world. You never use algebra in the real world. You never use trigonometry in the real world. And the reality is you do more often than you expect. But also, the those were considered kinds of reasoning, right? It was a reasoning skill, the ability to reason with numbers, the reason with logic. Most of geometry is actually a study in spatial logic, and that logical thinking can be taken and applied in other places and in other ways, because we aren't computers. We don't just simply compute. We analogize everything. So when you learn to think in a geometric, with geometric reasoning, that reasoning actually can shift and be used in multiple ways and in multiple areas, because we aren't really a computer. Well, in the same sort of way, we have uh, we have we think that materialism, physics, and the way materials work, that is the sum of everything about the universe. And if you've got if you're playing billiards, if you're playing pool, and somebody goes to um, shoot the ball, and I put my foot on the table, I throw my foot up there, and kick the ball out of the way. They say, well, hey, that's not the way this is supposed to work. You got in the way of the ball, and I say, no, it's just it's just physics. And they say, well, no, you put your will onto the ball by putting your foot in the way. This is a game where one shot gets the ball started, and then the rest is physics. You say, well, that makes sense for the rules of that game, but that's actually how we think of the entire universe. That it's that questions of whether it got started or how it got started, once you take that out of the equation, then the rest of it is just physics acting, and there's no longer any will involved in the movements. That is there's a couple of aspects of that are really interesting, but one is it forces us to think, to throw will out of the question, and to try and see from an objective materialistic perspective in order to see and understand what's going on out in the broader universe. But it also is completely outside of our experience that things move without will being involved, right? If you're out watching if you're out at a stream, right, and let's say you're standing in the middle of the stream and you're watching the water go past, and you see all of the rocks, and you see the leaves, and then you see something that moves in a different pattern than the water, right? You immediately assume, oh, there's a fish there, or a frog, or a turtle, or or a water buffalo, right? Something that swims underwater. We immediately assume there's a will involved, um, because it's moving different than the water that is flowing. Well, since that's our experience, that is our everyday experience, right? There isn't anything other than that. Uh, we the ancient and medieval people, when they looked up and they saw the planets, they assumed there must be intelligences involved, because it wasn't moving along with the flow of the stars. The planets, they sometimes go the same direction, they sometimes go different. They go at different rates, right? And they said, well, we know how this works. There must be some sort of intelligence involved, and the it's actually more reasonable than we think. We tend to, uh, because we don't believe in intelligences, right? Most of us, we when you say, well, why did the fish do that? Um, we don't we just think, well, instincts, that's what fish do, right? We don't actually even believe that a fish really has an intelligence. When we uh, now you can't really live that way because it's so opposed to reality, right? The behaviorism of people like B.F. Skinner actually creates insanity. The behaviorism of the Freudians and it actually creates this kind of insanity that keeps you from being able to really truly live when you think of people as in mechanistic terms. But we do actually fill our mind with it. We think that our body is a series of chemical reactions, simply a series of chemical reactions. We think of health in terms of getting the right chemicals in, the wrong chemicals out. It's a the metaphor system has taken over when we start to think of ourselves, and as well as the entire universe. Right? But it's actually um, not a particularly reasonable position in the sense that you have to bring a lot of assumptions with you to before you can get to the point where that makes sense. It's not as if that's the basic. The basic worldview, and then we have to add something else on. The idea that everything is physics and everything is materialistic, and there's just chemicals. It is very opposed to our experience, which is part of the reason that we have to throw our imagination out into space, um, out into the cold, dark, empty of space in order to feel like we're getting an objective perspective on it, because our subjective experience is so different than the conclusions we're trying to make. So hopefully that at least opens your mind up to the question that needs to be answered. And we'll, throughout the rest of this week, go through some of the ancient and medieval answers to that question, which I think are really helpful for expanding our imagination and being able to hold up a mirror to see our own assumptions about things and see how unreasonable some of our materialistic assumptions actually are.